In the 1990s, Los Angeles was less a city in the traditional sense and more a sprawling, chaotic ecosystem. A tangle of freeways, neighborhoods, subcultures, and contradictions stitched together under a haze of smog and sunlight. It wasn't just one place with one vibe. It was a mosaic of overlapping realities, glamorous and gritty, relaxed and razor-edged, chaotic and calm, sometimes all on the same block. Describing the decade as merely dynamic doesn't do it justice. The 90s in LA were loud, unpredictable, fast-moving, and surreal. A technicolor cocktail of sound and image, music and movies, malls and mayhem, rebellion and reinvention. It was a time when the city was still shaking off its 1980s neon hangover, but hadn't yet polished itself into the version seen on Instagram today. You couldn't just scroll through it. You had to be there. You had to feel it. The decade kicked off with an undercurrent of optimism, leftover energy from the late 80s cultural boom. There was this sense that anything could happen, that LA was the center of the universe, and for many, it actually was. The entertainment industry was thriving. Malls like the West Side Pavilion, Sherman Oaks Galleria, and the Beverly Center were bustling hubs of teen life and commercial energy. Kids hung out for hours without spending a dime, trying on oversized jeans at Miller's Outpost, flipping through CDs at Sam Goody, grabbing fries at Hot Dog on a Stick. It was an analog experience, physical and real, where social life was lived in person and eye contact mattered. Teenagers cruised Sunset Boulevard on Friday nights in hand-me-down Camaros or tricked-out Civics, blasting everything from Snoop Dogg's Gin and Juice to Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit out of scratchy speakers. You could measure trends by what was blasting out of passing cars. The city itself was a soundtrack. Melrose Avenue was a parade of self-expression. It was peak cool, graffiti-tagged alleys, vintage shops with uneven racks, indie record stores, and boutiques that smelled like clove cigarettes and vinyl. Punk kids, goth teens, fashion rejects, aspiring actors, and tattooed skaters all moved in and out of stores like Aardvark's Odd Ark, Wasteland, and Flip, searching for clothes no one else had. The original Johnny Rocket sat like a retro altar, where you could order a shake in a tall glass with the extra tin left on the side, and pretend for a moment that everything was simple. If you were there, it felt like the city belonged to you, even if it didn't. But beneath the sun-drenched veneer, something darker was brewing. The tensions were real, thick in the air, even if people didn't always talk about them. Economic inequality, racial division, and police brutality weren't new, but they boiled over in 1992 with the Rodney King verdict. The video of King's brutal beating by LAPD officers shocked the world. But when the officers were acquitted, the city exploded. For 5 days, LA was on fire, literally and figuratively. Entire blocks burned, windows were smashed, people ran from stores with televisions and shoes in their arms, others just watched from rooftops as smoke curled into the sky. It wasn't just civil unrest. It was a collective scream. Koreatown business owners armed themselves and stood on rooftops, guarding what was theirs with rifles in hand. Residents of South Central saw their streets overrun by rage and desperation. It was raw, unfiltered, caught on camera. Helicopters hovered constantly, tracking the chaos in real time. Local news stations became national spectacles, beaming images of a fractured city to the rest of the country. The sight of Reginald Denny, a white truck driver pulled from his rig and beaten on live TV, was burned into collective memory. The damage was extensive, billions in property loss, but the emotional scars went even deeper. There was a before and after to 1992. Conversations changed, attitudes shifted. The riots weren't just an event, they were a rupture. For years afterward, people spoke of that time with a kind of reverence, like it had exposed something unspoken and undeniable about the soul of the city. Then came 1994, and with it, one of the most unforgettable wake-up calls in Los Angeles history, the Northridge earthquake. At 4:31 a.m. on January 17th, the city was rocked by a violent 6.7 magnitude jolt that didn't just shake buildings, it shattered lives, twisted highways into broken ribbons, and turned entire apartment complexes into piles of splintered wood and concrete. Freeways collapsed like toy tracks, parking structures pancaked, and fires broke out across the San Fernando Valley. Power lines snapped, gas lines ruptured, and the sky filled with the sounds of sirens and news helicopters. For a few surreal hours, LA stood still. But as the dust settled, the city's resilience kicked in. Angelenos, used to things breaking and burning, did what they'd always done in a crisis. They dug through rubble, checked on neighbors, cursed the aftershocks, and got back to work. Earthquakes, like wildfires and riots, were part of the landscape, something everyone expected, dreaded, and ultimately endured. Rebuilding wasn't optional. It was instinctual. The rhythm of life carried on. So did the smaller, stranger rituals of daily survival in LA. There were still endless traffic jams that made a 5-mile trip feel like a cross-country journey. Smog alerts interrupted recess at school, and kids learned to distinguish between unhealthy and hazardous air quality before they could spell it. And then there were the car chases, those surreal, slow-motion dramas that would suddenly hijack every TV screen in the city. None more iconic than the O.J. Simpson Bronco pursuit in June of that same year. For hours, the former football hero cruised down the 405 with half the LAPD trailing behind, while the rest of the country watched in disbelief. It wasn't just a news story. It was theater, drama, myth-making, and live-streamed madness, all unfolding on familiar freeways. Yet, despite the heaviness, the tragedy, and the tension always lurking under the surface, the 90s in LA still managed to be wildly, ridiculously fun. The city had an unmatched ability to generate pleasure and escape. Arcades weren't just places to kill time, they were temples. Kids lined up for Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, and Time Crisis at Starkey's in the Beverly Center, or the glowing Chaotic Arcade in Westwood Village. These were sanctuaries of flashing lights and sticky floors where friendships were forged and rivalries settled with joysticks. The movies, meanwhile, were more than entertainment. They were local exports and cultural moments. Westwood and Century City theaters were packed every weekend, drawing huge crowds for premieres and blockbusters. The 90s film boom turned LA into its own myth. Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction reframed the city as a surreal, violent dreamscape. Speed showed us action that never hit the brakes. Boys in the Hood delivered a raw, unflinching look at South Central that put the neighborhood in the national spotlight. Terminator 2 made the LA River, usually a dull concrete trench, look like a battlefield from the future. Whether it was art house weird or popcorn spectacle, film was in LA's bones, and the city gave every kind of story a place to live. And then there was the music. Unpredictable, electric, genre-hopping music that could only exist in a city like this. Grunge may have started in Seattle, but it swept over LA like fog, mixing with the city's own flavors. The Red Hot Chili Peppers brought a funky, sunburned punk rock that felt like Venice Beach, set to music. Sublime made backyard parties in Long Beach feel legendary. Rage Against the Machine blasted from high school parking lots, channeling fury and politics through slamming guitars. No Doubt bridged ska and pop from their Orange County stronghold. The airwaves were ruled by KROQ and Indie 103.1, stations that weren't afraid to bounce from punk to new wave to hip-hop to metal in the span of 10 minutes. And then there was Tower Records on Sunset. Part store, part holy ground. You didn't just go there to buy CDs. You went to browse for hours, eavesdrop on conversations, bump into musicians, and soak in the chaos of 1,000 album covers staring back at you. Underground, another scene pulsed in the dark. The raves. You didn't find them. They found you. Flyers were slipped under windshield wipers, handed out at other parties, or left in skate shops and indie record stores. You'd call a number that led to another number, then maybe a location would be revealed at the last second. It might be a warehouse off Alameda, a desert flat outside Lancaster, or a hollowed-out building downtown with a single black light and a massive speaker stack. The crowds came dressed in candy-colored beads, fuzzy boots, mesh shirts, or just enough clothes to dance all night without overheating. Ecstasy was everywhere. So were glow sticks, whistles, and the unspoken code of PLUR. Peace, love, unity, and respect. For a few hours in those humid, deafening spaces, LA wasn't fractured. It was whole, beating like a giant neon heart. Of course, not everything glowed. LA in the 90s had a sharp, dangerous edge, and you couldn't ignore it. Gang violence was woven into the city's fabric, especially in neighborhoods like South Central, Compton, Inglewood, and parts of Van Nuys. For many, gunshots were as familiar as fireworks. Helicopters hovered nightly, their searchlights slicing across backyards and rooftops like silent warnings. Sirens weren't rare, they were background noise. Some kids learned how to tell a backfire from a gunshot before they learned algebra. Families warned their kids which colors not to wear. Some blocks felt like war zones after dark. But life went on. Kids played Sega Genesis in dim living rooms, shared controller cords tangled like roots. Others climbed canyon trails behind Hollywood, dodged security guards at abandoned pools, or rolled bikes down Ventura Boulevard in noisy packs. Life wasn't sanitized. It was rough, strange, funny, unpredictable. And in all its contradictions, it was unmistakably Los Angeles. Shopping in Los Angeles during the 1990s wasn't just about buying things. It was a whole atmosphere, a social ritual, a day-long experience with its own soundtrack and style codes. Malls weren't just places to pick up jeans or a new CD. They were central meeting spots, fashion runways, and safe havens from boredom. The city was packed with them. Fox Hills Mall was a hub for black culture and teen fashion. The Sherman Oaks Galleria, still living off its Valley Girl fame, drew crowds with its movie theaters and food court hangouts. And the Beverly Center attracted shoppers from all walks of life, from locals to out-of-town tourists hoping to spot a celebrity. Every mall had its own flavor. Chain stores like Contempo Casuals and Wet Seal catered to teens trying to figure out their personal style, one miniskirt or platform sneaker at a time. Sam Goody, The Warehouse, and Music Plus were where you went to spend hours flipping through CD long boxes, debating between buying the new Smashing Pumpkins album or saving your money for that limited edition import single. And Fedco, now lost to time, was part warehouse, part fever dream. Where else could you buy a NES cartridge, a pair of sweatpants, a box of donuts, and a cherry ice without leaving the building? Living in Los Angeles back then didn't cost you your soul or your whole paycheck. Rent was laughably low compared to now. You could score a decent one-bedroom in Koreatown, Silver Lake, or even parts of Los Feliz for under $700 a month. Students, artists, and musicians packed into these places, often with roommates or significant others, making rent stretch in creative ways. Gas was barely over $1, and people didn't panic about parking. You could roll up to almost any curb after 6 p.m., throw your car in park, and be good for the night without worrying about permits or getting towed. Coffee shops weren't curated experiences. They were gritty little spots with mismatched furniture, pin boards full of flyers, and customers who paid in coins and stayed for hours. You didn't take pictures of your latte. You nursed it while reading Bukowski, sketching in a notebook, or arguing about Deleuze and the Velvet Underground. Food in the 90s was a glorious mashup of flavors and cultures long before the word fusion became a marketing gimmick. Late-night munchies meant drive-through runs, and the options were serious. Tito's Tacos was a rite of passage. Tommy's served burgers so greasy they soaked through the paper bag by the time you got home. Fatburger gave you the chance to customize your order to absurd perfection. Food trucks were mostly Mexican loncheras and taco stands. No Twitter location drops, no branding, just authentic flavors from people who had been cooking these recipes for generations. The seeds of future food revolutions were being planted, though. You could find Korean BBQ joints tucked between auto body shops, Salvadoran pupuserias on otherwise quiet blocks, and hole-in-the-wall Jewish delis with matzo ball soup that could cure anything. The diversity of LA was on full display through its food long before it became a trendy talking point. Downtown Los Angeles wasn't the cultural epicenter it is now. Back then, it was a ghost town after office hours. There were signs of life, some underground clubs, sketchy warehouse parties, and art galleries trying to claim space. But overall, the streets emptied once the sun went down. Echo Park had edge. There was crime, sure, but also creativity. Punk shows in backyards, mariachi bands practicing on front porches, and street vendors serving grilled corn on late summer nights. Silver Lake was still rough around the edges, not yet overtaken by yoga studios and artisanal donut shops. It was full of queer communities, struggling musicians, and artists living in dusty bungalows with broken windows and big dreams. Venice Beach had an unfiltered energy. Skate rats, graffiti kids, drum circles, weirdos, and wanderers. Venice was never about curated cool. It just was. And then there was Hollywood, a tourist magnet by day and a low-key danger zone by night. If you ended up there after dark, it was usually for a reason. Tattoos, tacos, a sketchy rave in a warehouse, or maybe just because you didn't know any better. As the decade wound down, the change was in the air. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Coachella launched in 1999, not yet the influencer mecca it would become, but still a signal that LA's music culture was moving in a new direction. The internet started to stretch its arms into everyday life. Dial-up connections became common, and Napster arrived to destroy and redefine the way people got their music. Suddenly, you didn't have to drive to Tower Records to hear a new track. You could download it in 10 minutes if you were lucky and had the patience. Cell phones were no longer a rarity. What was once a status symbol for finance bros and drug dealers started becoming more accessible, especially the indestructible Nokia bricks that let you call your friends and play Snake in between classes or coffee shop shifts. The LA of the early 90s, a little more analog, a little more raw, was fading. Something slicker, more digital, more manicured was taking its place. To live in Los Angeles during the 1990s was to constantly move between extremes. One night, you might be rubbing shoulders with celebrities at a rooftop party in the hills. The next night, you're sitting on the curb eating carne asada tacos at 2 a.m. with your friends, trying to remember where you parked. You could walk out of a poetry reading in Westwood and wind up at a cumbia party in Boyle Heights an hour later. You probably had a pager clipped to your belt, a mixed CD in your Discman, and a folded-up MapQuest printout to find that one record store in Highland Park everyone said had the best imports. It was a city that demanded energy, creativity, and flexibility. Nothing was ever easy, but nothing was boring either. The 1990s in Los Angeles weren't just about trends or moments. They were about movement, possibility, and contradiction. It was a time when the city felt open in ways that are hard to find now. You could be broke and still feel rich in experience. You could be weird and find your people. You could show up with nothing and build a life out of mixtapes, thrifted jackets, cheap tacos, and late-night conversations under flickering neon. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, loud, beautiful, and brutally real. And for those who were lucky enough to live it, that era carved itself into their bones. It wasn't just a memory. It was a part of them.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199X, we're here just for you, for you.